Hey again, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Discussions of Darkness. This week, I wanted to talk about something that I feel most people might have missed because, for whatever reason, Hunter is not as popular a game as Changeling, Vampire, Werewolf, and others. And there is a great little gem buried deep inside of it, especially if you, like me, feel that the loss of Pentex in the Chronicles of Darkness changeover was something that made the setting feel a little smaller and a little less threatening. Because it seems that, when I wasn't looking, Hunter did in fact give us a successor to Pentex in the Cheiron group. Now, if you're not familiar with any of what it is I'm talking about, perhaps you're new to the channel, perhaps you're new to the world of darkness, don't worry, I'm going to get into things. However, if you want to take a moment and check out an older video of ours, The Problem with Pentex is the most popular video on our channel, clocked in at about 13,000 views when last I checked before recording. So I would recommend, if you have not seen that, go give it a watch before you come back here, because a lot of the things I'm about to discuss will make way more sense if you've seen that particular video essay. Anyway, to begin at the beginning. Pentex was one of the major threats from the old world of darkness, and it started as a werewolf antagonist. Pentex is, in essence, corporate greed made manifest. Its origin, as far as we know for canon, began during the oil boom in Texas. A individual who owned oil wells found himself, well, stranded in one of his own wells, and he had to make a bargain with a corrupt spirit in order to get out. He and the spirit ended up forming a company, the company ended up buying other companies, and Pentex is, well, a profit-driven monster machine. It wants nothing more than to wring as much profit out of every single possible industry it can, and if it so happens to injure and corrupt the planet and the people who live here, well, so much the better. It is a multi-headed hydra, and it is a phenomenal antagonist because it is one of those things that is so entrenched in the modern world as far as corporations go that fighting back against it can feel difficult because, sure, you can shoot one CEO, you can burn down one warehouse, but tomorrow there's just going to be another and another and another. And it can make a really interesting plot, whether you're in Werewolf, whether you're in Vampire, or whether you're doing Hunter the Reckoning. Pentex is a great antagonist because in addition to all of the normal mortal evil it does, it also has vampires on the board of directors. It works closely with people looking to figure out ways to purposefully create banes. There's all sorts of plots you could just tailor fit it to, and all you need to do is create a new subsidiary that happens to handle the specific thing your plot is for. Link in the video description below. I have a list of Pentex subsidiaries if you want someone to do some of the heavy lifting for you. With that said, though, the Cheiron group, the Chronicles of Darkness installation, does a lot of the same things that Pentex did, but more importantly, it fixes some of the complaints that I had, which those who have seen the problems with Pentex will know about. Because the Cheiron group, on the surface, is very similar to Pentex. It is a corporation that is technically upholding the vigil and protecting humans from monsters, but it's doing so in a very, well, icky way. It is a massive conglomeration, but whereas Pentex was begun with the fossil fuel industry because of the symbolism of the fossil fuel industry destroying the planet, the Cheiron group, as the name might imply since it's named after the centaur from Greek myth, is more of a pharmaceutical giant. And when you look at the hunters who serve the Cheiron group, that makes more sense. Because where other people might consider the supernatural threats to humanity, they might consider them just monsters to be dealt with, the Cheiron group thinks of them as assets or resources. And while it's very likely they recruit supernatural creatures to operate on their behalf, they're more known for capturing supernatural creatures to study them, dissect them, and occasionally vivisect them to figure out what it is that makes them tick and what do they produce that we can use. As a result, their field operatives tend to have access to what's called thaumatech. These are bodily improvements and implants that they have gotten from various supernatural creatures that has turned them into something more than just a mere human. And this gives the Cheiron group an extra level of body horror, but it does manifest something different from Pentex. Pentex seemed very much driven on occasionally evil for the sake of evil. They had supernatural goals in addition to mortal goals. Whereas the Cheiron group in this case seems to be more of a good goal that's been twisted. Because on its surface, a company that wants to produce medicines, wants to produce drugs, wants to produce cheap and affordable prosthetics, wants to help people overcome disabilities, wants to make people the best they can be, seems good. That seems like a very good goal to have. But when you take it and push it to that nth degree, you end up with a corporation that has no bounds and has no morality and is willing to do whatever horrible things it can to, achieve the next big breakthrough. It's also worth noting the time period for both of these. Pentex was, of course, established in the late 1800s, and so by the time the First Great War and then the Second Great War came around, it had mostly established its foothold. The current version of the Cheiron group was incorporated in the very early 1900s, which means that you have a massive European pharmaceutical company who happened to be around during some of the worst times of human history, where we were performing all sorts of awful medical experiments on each other. So whether you want to have them in the European theater during the atrocities of the Nazis' rise to power, or if you want to have them getting their clutches into what was going on over with Japan's war crimes, there's a lot of history there that the Cheiron group could have been attached to and participating in, particularly when you consider they might be a stand-in for real-world companies like Bayer. If you're not familiar with Bayer's history, I recommend checking it out, but make sure you have a strong stomach before you do. However, I mentioned the current version of the Cheiron group, and this gets to the other problem that I had with Pentex that I feel the Cheiron group neatly solves. Because for the old world of darkness, one of the major establishing themes through all of the antagonists and all of the protagonists was that everything was old. Werewolves, vampires, mages, hunters, everything went back to the dawn of human civilization, and so too did most of the things they were fighting against or struggling with. But Pentex always felt like a Johnny-come-lately. It had just popped onto the scene in the late 1800s and become a massive global threat in the span of 50 to 100 years, depending on how long it took them to establish themselves. And that always felt very strange, because everything else you're dealing with is a threat that's centuries or millennia old. And thus I made suggestions for how to pad the resume for Pentex and how to stretch it back even further, because when we're talking about the evils of capitalism and the evils of corporations, sure, the fossil fuel industry burying its own effects on the environment and making profit off the suffering of others while they made everyone around them sick, that's a good place to start if you're looking thematically. But if you could go even further back beyond that, you have the East India Trading Company, you have the Royal Africa Company. Before that, you have individuals who are doing even worse things, if you can believe that. So the ability to trade money for suffering is a very old human pastime, and I felt like Pentex was just sort of hitting the top of the iceberg on that. Whereas the Cheiron group does something that I suggested, and it's that this is merely the most recent incarnation of this particular group. It has had many names and it has existed in many different places back to the days of ancient Egypt, the days of ancient Greece. Their symbol has been found, and it is always, a bearded man with horns superimposed over a caduceus. Very recognizable symbol that just keeps coming back, and it gives us that idea that what we're seeing today, this version of the Cheiron group, is just one of many incarnations it has gone through, and that gives it an unspoken history, which is very interesting because that gives the storyteller space to fill things in, while giving us just enough details and just enough examples to know, oh, this goes back a long time, and hunters have been fighting and doing various other things under this banner and under this sigil for centuries. And that is something that can add a lot of weight to an organization. It is also something that can add a lot of weight of history to your game. And for that reason, I think that while it is a different incarnation, it's very much not the same thing, just translated over. And if that's what they were trying to do, they camouflaged it very well. But I would definitely say the Cheiron group is a worthy successor to Pentex, not just because it gave it a bigger history, it made it more intricate, and it gave us the option to have player characters from the group that aren't necessarily going around twirling their mustache and pissing on the planet. But it also made it more morally complex than get resources, trade for money. There are so many other reasons someone might end up working for or, well, enslaved to the Cheiron group. And it's the question of, is this version of it the problem, or has it always been a problem? Is there a history going back to the dawn of the group, or to the Enlightenment, or to various other times where they have just made discoveries that have twisted their mission? And I can't say for certain, but that is an interesting question, and it's one worth playing with. Whether you want to have them as an antagonist, which, could work if you're playing either a hunter game or any of the other games, because whatever kind of monster you are, the Cheiron group is very interested in what it can make out of you. So you can put them pretty much anywhere, and their field agents can have a bevy of strange abilities that can make them more than just a bunch of mortals with guns. But that's the end of my very short comparison for this week. This is the second time I've talked about one of the hunter conspiracies. The last one was the Loyalists of Thule, which if you didn't check out that video, I highly recommend it. They are the anti-fascist faction, and their history is a lot of fun. But should I talk about more of the factions from Hunter? Should I talk about more of the factions and groups from other spheres of the World of Darkness? And if so, which games would you like to see discussed? We've had a couple of requests for Older Vampire. I do not have my hands on those books yet, but that is an ongoing test of mine, so stay tuned for when I eventually manage to track them down. I will have some thoughts once I find some time to read them. I can practically promise that. But as always, like, share, subscribe. Comments of 7 words or more are deeply appreciated. And until next time, happy gaming, everyone.
Thank you for staying to the end of this episode of Discussions of Darkness. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking the video and sharing it on your own social media to help boost the signal. And if you'd like to help us keep the show and channel going, don't forget to hit that subscribe button as well. If you have any questions about the topic I covered today, or if you have something you'd like to see covered in a future episode, make sure to leave it in the comments below. Lastly, please check out the link in the video description to browse all of my World and Chronicles of Darkness supplements from Ezekiel Games. So far, we've covered Changeling the Lost, Vampire the Masquerade, Mage the Awakening, and Geist the Sin Eaters, in addition to a handful of general supplements that will be useful for any game set in the World or Chronicles of Darkness settings. Thank you in advance for your support. You're the ones who help us keep the lights on, so we don't fade into the shadows.